There is a country that has spent the last several months quietly, and then not so quietly, rewriting the terms of its relationship with the world. Not in a single dramatic moment, not with a tweet or a tariff or a threat, but in a methodical, deliberate, layered series of agreements, partnerships, and institutional commitments that, when you look at them together, amount to something genuinely remarkable. A middle power deciding with clarity and urgency that it can no longer afford to depend on any single ally for its economic survival, its technological sovereignty, or its national defense. That country is Canada. That Prime Minister is Mark Carney. And what he has done in the last 8 weeks, including what he announced just this past week, deserves your full attention. Let's lay it out carefully, because the individual pieces of this story have each generated their own headlines, but when you see them together, the picture they form is something much larger than any one announcement. It started in the most visible public sense at the World Economic Forum in Davos in late January. Carney stood at the podium in Switzerland and told the assembled leaders of governments and corporations that the world had experienced what he called a rupture. The old assumptions that had underpinned the international rules-based order, the assumptions of stable alliances, of predictable trading relationships, of security through integration, had eroded. Middle powers, he said, needed to act. They needed to pool their strength. They needed to find each other. The speech was heard around the world. Andrea Sharon, director of the Center for Defense and Security Studies at the University of Manitoba, later called it a genuinely important inflection point. Canada's own AI minister, Evan Solomon, told reporters after his trip to Munich the following week that he heard about Carney's Davos speech in every single meeting he attended, everyone. What Carney said in Davos was not abstract. In the weeks immediately surrounding that speech, he had already been to Beijing. From January 13th to 17th, Carney made the first visit to China by a Canadian Prime Minister since 2017, meeting directly with President Xi Jinping, Premier Li Qiang, and senior Chinese government and business leaders. What he came back with was a strategic partnership focused on energy, agriculture, and trade, and specific time-bound tariff commitments. China agreed to lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed from approximately 85% to approximately 15% by March 1st of this year. That is a $4 billion market for Canadian producers. He also secured agreements that canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas would not be subject to relevant anti-discrimination tariffs through at least the end of 2026. Together, the Canadian government estimated those moves would unlock nearly $3 billion in export orders. Canada set a goal to increase its total exports to China by 50% by 2030. 1 week later in Davos, Carney called it part of a deliberate strategy to move Canada from reliance to resilience. Then came Munich. Carney had been scheduled to attend the Munich Security Conference from February 11th to 15th, one of the most significant gatherings of global security and foreign policy leaders in the world. He canceled at the last minute following a mass shooting at a school in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. So instead, his ministers went, and they were extraordinarily busy. On February 14th, at the margins of the Munich Security Conference, AI and Digital Innovation Minister Evan Solomon and Germany's Minister for Digital Transformation, Carsten Wildberger, signed a joint declaration of intent on artificial intelligence and simultaneously announced the launch of something called the Sovereign Technology Alliance. This is not a talking points document. This is not an aspirational statement. This is a formal bilateral framework for practical cooperation on advanced technologies built on a Canada-Germany digital alliance that both countries had already announced on December 8th of last year. The Sovereign Technology Alliance focuses specifically on 3 things: expanding secure compute infrastructure, accelerating AI research and commercialization, and strengthening talent development. Both governments say explicitly that its goal is to reduce strategic technology dependencies. That phrase is used repeatedly in the official documents, meaning dependence on concentrated providers, which in the current global context means principally the United States and China. Solomon described it as a really important step in deepening alliances with Europe. He said the Germans were keen on the deal specifically because they believe Canada is taking a leadership role in AI governance questions. The joint declaration of intent specifically mentions Law Zero, a Canadian AI safety organization founded by Turing Prize winner Professor Yoshua Bengio. Germany will also serve as Country of the Year at Canada's All-In AI Conference in Montreal in September 2026. Canada and Germany are marking 75 years of diplomatic relations this year. Both governments described this as moving from vision to implementation. Also on February 14th, also in Munich, Defense Minister David McGuinty signed something that is even larger in scope. Canada officially joined the European Union's Security Action for Europe program, known as SAFE. This matters enormously, and it deserves a full explanation. SAFE is a €150 billion loan instrument established by the European Union in May 2025 as part of its Readiness 2030 defense package. It provides EU member states with low-interest, long-maturity loans to purchase military equipment and build defense industrial capacity: ammunition, missiles, drones, artillery systems, naval capabilities. Canada is the first non-European country to join SAFE. The European Council itself confirmed that Canada has concluded an agreement under Article 17 of the SAFE regulation. Canada paid approximately €10 million as its participation contribution. In exchange, Canadian companies can now partner with European firms to bid on joint SAFE projects and access EU-backed defense financing. McGuinty said the agreement gives Canadian industry access to European defense markets while contributing to European and Ukrainian security. For Canadian manufacturers in aerospace, ammunition, digital systems, naval construction, this opens a market they have never previously had privileged access to at this scale. One day later, on February 17th, Carney stood at the CAE facility in Montreal and launched what his government described as Canada's first ever defense industrial strategy. The announcement was, by any measure, extraordinary in its scope and ambition. The strategy is built around what Carney called a build, partner, buy framework. What that means in plain English is this: build sovereign capabilities at home first, in shipbuilding, aerospace, space, land systems, and digital technologies. Partner with trusted allies in Europe, the United Kingdom, and the Indo-Pacific to access capabilities that strengthen all partners. And only then buy from outside that framework. The strategy explicitly prioritizes Canadian firms and Canadian manufacturing as a matter of national policy. New defense procurements will go to Canadian companies first. A new defense investment agency will streamline procurement, cut red tape, and manage Canada's participation in joint procurement initiatives with allies. The numbers Carney put behind this strategy are staggering. Canada will invest $180 billion in defense procurement over the next decade, an additional $290 billion in defense and security-related capital investment over the same period. The government estimates that will produce $125 billion in downstream economic benefits by 2035. Canada will double its defense expenditure by the end of this decade, an additional $80 billion over the next 5 years. And as part of its NATO commitments, Canada will invest an additional $45 billion per year in domestic resilience. In terms of NATO's percentage of GDP spending benchmarks, Carney said Canada is now on track to hit the 2% target this spring, a full decade ahead of the previous government's schedule. When Canada's government last took office, the country was widely criticized within NATO for chronically underspending on defense. Applications to join the Canadian Armed Forces are up 13% since June. Carney was explicit about what strategic autonomy means and what it does not mean. In his speech at CAE, he said directly, "Strategic autonomy does not mean isolation. It means being strong enough to be a partner of choice rather than a dependent. It means building a domestic defense industrial base so that we are never hostage to the decisions of others when it comes to our own security. And it means diversifying our partnerships so that we are resilient against any single point of failure." He named the partnership with the United States as vital and necessary, while making clear that Canada cannot afford to depend on any single relationship as its primary source of security. He said the assumptions that shaped decades of Canadian defense and foreign policy had been, and here he used a blunt word, completely upended. The following day, February 16th, Carney spoke by phone with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer. The call covered deepening trade ties, progress on the Canada-UK Economic and Trade Working Group across digital trade, critical minerals, and sovereign AI infrastructure, and a new institutional idea that is worth watching carefully: a proposed Defense, Security, and Resilience Bank, the DSR Bank. This is a proposed multilateral institution owned by member nation states designed to provide multi-year, low-cost financing for defense and security investments, and to unlock private capital for defense and security companies across the supply chain. Carney and Starmer agreed to task their respective teams with advancing it. The province of British Columbia has already put in a bid to host the bank's international headquarters in Vancouver, arguing that the city can conduct business across the Indo-Pacific, European, and Arctic time zones within a single business day. The DSR Bank, once fully established, is expected to include up to 40 member countries. And threading through all of this is a broader conversation about trade architecture that could reshape entire regions of global commerce. Both the Canada-UK call and broader Canadian trade discussions this week touched on ongoing negotiations for a potential alliance between the European Union and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, the CPTPP bloc. CPTPP includes Canada, the UK, Japan, Australia, Mexico, Vietnam, Malaysia, Singapore, Chile, Peru, Brunei, and New Zealand. The EU has a combined GDP of roughly $18 trillion. Together, the potential framework could bring together nearly 40 countries under shared rules of origin and low-tariff arrangements. Canadian delegates also traveled to CPTPP member Mexico this week to discuss new bilateral trade opportunities. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce noted that only 1.1% of Canada's exports currently go to Mexico, and that deepening that relationship is essential to Canada's diversification strategy. There is a through line connecting all of these moves that Carney himself has articulated clearly. Canada spent decades betting that economic integration with a single dominant partner, the United States, would guarantee its security and prosperity. That bet worked for a long time. It no longer feels safe. And so Canada is doing, quickly and systematically, what a country does when it decides the terms of its dependence are no longer acceptable. It builds relationships. It invests in itself. It finds partners who share its interests and its values. It constructs institutions, a sovereign technology alliance with Germany, a defense partnership with the European Union, a DSR bank with the United Kingdom, a strategic partnership with China that distribute its exposure and multiply its options. It commits real money in historically large quantities to its own industrial capacity. None of this is without risk. Some critics have questioned whether the China partnership goes too far too fast, given Beijing's human rights record and its strategic rivalry with Canada's democratic allies. The Walrus noted that the defense industrial strategy's targets may be ambitious to the point of being unrealistic given Canada's procurement history. Open Canada cautioned that safe is not a silver bullet, and that Canada's defense relationship with the United States, however strained, cannot simply be replaced by European alternatives. These are legitimate questions that deserve serious debate. But here is what is not in dispute. In 8 weeks, Canada has signed a sovereign AI pact with Germany, joined a €150 billion European defense procurement program as its first non-European member, launched its first-ever defense industrial strategy backed by hundreds of billions in committed spending, proposed a new multilateral defense financing bank with the United Kingdom, struck a strategic trade partnership with China, and positioned itself in the middle of a potentially transformative conversation about global trade architecture involving nearly 40 countries. It did all of this deliberately, systematically, and with the explicit stated goal of never again being hostage, in Carney's own word, to the decisions of others. The world is watching. The question now is whether Canada can execute. Stay with us.